Everything in this episode really happened. On January 30th, 1969, just 10 days into his presidency, Richard Nixon asked Congress to give him the power to reorganize the federal government's executive branch. He wanted to streamline Washington's confusing web of agencies and departments. But the old law that once allowed presidents to propose such shakeups had expired, and Nixon needed it reinstated. By March 1969, Congress gave Nixon what he needed. He formed the President's Advisory Council on Executive Reorganization, known as the Ash Council, to figure out how to make government run better. After months of study, the Ash Council delivered a 427-page report suggesting major changes. Here's Jeff Shepard, who, in 1969, was there personally. He was the youngest lawyer at the time on Nixon's White House staff.
I became Associate Director of General Government. I was responsible on a day-to-day requirement for the core government functions.
He's also the author of the book, The Real Watergate Scandal.
It's very Republican. Government reorganization it's streamlining, making the government more efficient, and it doesn't cost any money. This isn't a giveaway to constituents. This is making the government more efficient. One of the questions you might ask is, why was executive organization important to Dick Nixon? I was there, and the obvious answer to me is he really wanted to be in charge of the executive branch. Spent his career in politics. He'd been a congressman, a senator, vice president, been in the wilderness for 8 years thinking about what he would do. He's president. He's reelected by the biggest landslide in the nation's history to do executive reorganization. This was personal. It was hugely important to him.
Nixon went public with his plan in the January 22, 1971 State of the Union address, calling for fewer, bigger departments to handle their missions more efficiently.
Based on a long and intensive study, I have concluded that a sweeping reorganization of the executive branch is needed if the government is to keep up with the times and with the needs of the people.
Nixon planned to keep Senate, Treasury, Defense, and Justice as they were, and merge the rest into 4 new departments:
human resources, community development, natural resources, and economic development.
He believed grouping related responsibilities together would cut red tape and make government more direct and helpful. But this required Congress to give up some of its control over agency structures.
I realize that even this Congress will have to change by giving up some of its power. Change is hard, but without change there can be no progress. And for each of us, the question then becomes, not will change cause me inconvenience, but will change bring progress for America?
So, Nixon tried again. In March 1971, he warned that government promised more than it delivered, but still, no action came before the election. But Democrats still controlled Congress, and old obstacles remained.
The Congress had no interest whatsoever in executive reorganization. But then when Nixon won re-election, he said, if the Congress won't act, I will act by executive order, and I will put this into effect on my authority. It's my branch, and I want it made more efficient.
He reassigned top staffers to focus solely on reorganization. One of those staffers was John Ehrlichman, a key figure in Nixon's domestic policy team.
John's fingers were in everything. He may not have been legally in charge, but he was heavily involved in all domestic initiatives.
Jeff Shepard also served as a member of the domestic council staff, working closely with Ehrlichman and other senior aides. Shepard had a front-row seat as the White House tried to push executive reorganization forward.
And John decamped to Camp David after November 1972. He basically left the Domestic Council, and they brought senior cabinet officials to Camp David for interviews and discussions.
I think Nixon had a number of priorities for the second term.
This is Luke Nichter, professor, historian, and a foremost expert on the Nixon White House recordings.
You look at, for example, his White House tapes.
Yes, sir.
Holloman, please.
Thank you.
In late 1972, after the re-election.
Hello. Well, congratulations, Mr. President. What's it look like at the 8 o'clock reading? Looks to me like a very big landslide. They've called us winning it. By God, isn't that great?
I think he really begins planning for that second term that night. He and others are really planning, I think, really the building blocks of what's going to become a second term.
The fundamental dichotomy or the fundamental cleavage within the Democratic Party is such that with what you're doing to build the new majority and what I hope to help you doing.
And they're talking about reorganization of government.
I think we're going to keep them split, and I'm also bullish about what we can do in this country in terms of the basic philosophies or the basic allegiances of people.
They sound very much like a brainstorming session, a kind of what's possible.
And what they said was, look, the game is going to change. There are 12 departments. 4 are core government functions. They will remain whole. And the other will be consolidated into 4 domestic. And we would call these 4 informally grant-making institutions. They were trying to help the states to accomplish things through the expenditure of money, but with federal money come regulation and requirements. And we're going to straighten that out.
But Ehrlichman would soon be swept up in the Watergate scandal. By April 1973, he resigned as Nixon's counsel and top domestic aide under intense pressure, and would later face criminal charges and conviction related to Watergate.
And I can pinpoint that date. That date was April 30th, 1973, just 3 or 4 months after Nixon was re-inaugurated. And that's when he announced the resignations. And news to us, most surprising thing I can ever remember. I was shocked beyond comprehension.
With Ehrlichman gone and the scandal deepening, Nixon's political capital evaporated. Without that leverage, the grand reorganization never happened.
That was the end of it. There wasn't going to be any executive reorganization after that. The policy decisions done by the president himself. Hugely important. He thought he could change government forever if he could accomplish this. But it was a bridge too far. He didn't have congressional cooperation. He didn't have a majority. He couldn't have confirmed these super cabinet people. That wouldn't work. And then Watergate starts to grow, and particularly from the end of January, it starts to undermine the president's authority and standing in the public.
But what if the Watergate scandal hadn't happened? Jeff Shepard considers that big question.
What if he had really consolidated the 4 branches? Would have been nice if we'd succeeded, and we might have made government far more efficient for a while. I think we could have done an awful lot with the core government functions, state justice, treasury, and defense. And if they worked, they would have stayed in place.
Instead, over the next 5 decades, the government kept growing. In the 1970s, there were 12 main departments. Today, the executive branch includes 15: State, Treasury, Defense, Justice, Interior,
Department of Energy,
Department of Education,
the Department of Health and Human Services,
the Social Security Administration,
The Federal Emergency Management Agency,
the State Department of Veterans Affairs,
the Transportation Security Administration, Department of Homeland Security,
the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
The federal budget is now more than 6 times larger after inflation than in Nixon's day. The national debt is 12 times bigger. But the idea of executive reorganization isn't dead. President Trump recently appointed Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, an office aimed at cutting waste and modernizing how agencies serve the public. Here is Ramaswamy in 2023 addressing his views on Nixon.
He was deeply pragmatic. He was a realist who believed that the job of the U.S. president, above all, was, who would have ever thought, to advance the interests of Americans who live in the United States of America. That is a spirit we would do well to remember today.
The difficulty is today, Trump might have run and won on government reorganization. He may come up with a grandiose plan. I think he'll start with piecemeal, stuff he can do without Congress coming along. But over time, it may evolve.
It's not Nixon's exact plan, but it shows the urge to fix government bureaucracy never truly disappears. It just waits for another chance.
If Nixon Stayed is a docuseries produced by the marketing team at the Richard Nixon Foundation and the audio team at Foundwave Productions. All episodes of If Nixon Stayed are streaming now, and for more of our work, check out our other original docuseries, Captured, Shot Down in Vietnam.